Welcome to the second part in my series of Python tutorials. For more information, please visit docs.python.org/3.3/tutorial. Now, last tutorial I talked about invoking the interpreter and setting the path. On OS X or Linux, it's already set for you, so you don't really need to do any extra configuration because these systems already come with Python installed. But on Windows, Python isn't installed by default, so you need to download it from the Python website and then install it to the Python directory. Now, on OS X and Linux, Python's integrated development environment, or IDLE, isn't just installed by default, so you have to install it yourself. Now, when you get IDLE installed, the logo for IDLE looks like this, just the Python logo. Now, there's two different types of versions for IDLE, one for each Python version. I have both IDLE 3 for Python 3 and IDLE for Python 2.7 installed on my system. You can start Python by going in your command prompt or terminal and typing Python, not Python. You can type Python, or you can just get IDLE and start Python from there, because when you click on IDLE, it automatically starts the Python shell. Now, this isn't used for writing scripts. This is an actual shell where when you type stuff in, it executes the command, because this is the interactive mode for the shell. Now, let me explain how the shell works. You know what version of the shell you're using because it says Python. For me, it says Python 3.4.3 in the top, and it also shows your OS on Linux. Now, you see these three characters right here. These three characters. When you see those, that means the shell is prompting you for a command. Now, if you hit enter and you don't type anything, then nothing's being executed, so it'll prompt you for another command. If there's a line that doesn't have those three characters, then that means it's not prompting you for a command, or there's nothing you can do. Now, as you can see, I just executed a command that'll make the shell sleep for 10 seconds. And there's nothing I can do because it's not prompting me for a command. The prompt characters aren't there. But now that it's back, I can do stuff in the shell again. Now let's talk about comments. Comments are just there in the code to clarify it. So let's say you're making a project and you're collaborating with it with someone else, and your code is kind of confusing or it's really complex. You can add a comment to clarify what the code does. Now, comments start with the hash character or pound or whatever you want to call it, and it begins from what do you call it? It begins from the hash character and it extends all the way to the end of the line. And because, like I said, they're not interpreted by the shell, you won't get any syntax or anything for putting a comment anywhere on your code. So, say comment. So let me just write a code for function. So that function, this function does this. Now if I do that, it will say invalid syntax. But if I say define function and then I put a comment and say this function does this, then no syntax error. Alright, now let's talk about how you can use the shell as a calculator. It can be used as a calculator very easily, and the expression syntax is very straightforward. You have your normal operators: addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication, using these four characters. Now, you can also use parentheses for grouping. So let me show you a few examples. 5 plus 5, 10. 4 times 6, 24. 9 minus 6, 3. Now, division is a bit special. You see, in Python, well, not only Python, but almost all programming languages, there's different types of numbers, integers and floating point numbers. Integers have the type int, and floating point numbers have the type float. Now, if you don't know what an integer is any whole number that ranges from negative infinity to infinity. So if you have a number 7, that is an integer. So if I do type 7, it's integer. Now, a floating point number is any number that has a decimal or a fraction part in it. So if I do type 7.0, then it's going to say float. Now, division, when you do division in Python, it always returns a floating point number. So if I do 21 divided by 7, then it says 3.0, which makes it a floating point number. Now, there's a few special types of division that I'm going to talk about. There's floor division, remainder division, and powers. Floor division, well, powers isn't division, but yeah. Floor division, it will always return an integer. So it will discard any fraction that's in the number and just return it as an integer. So let's take 17 divided by 3. Let's just do regular division, right? 17 divided by 3 is 5.6. Now remember, the floor operator is 2 forward slashes. Division, regular division is only 1, floor is 2. So if I do 17 divided by 3 using floor division, then it'll return 5 because it discards the fraction, makes it integer. Now, let's talk about remainder division. Remainder division does the division, but returns the remainder of the division. So if I do 17 divided by 3 with remainder division, then it returns 2. So now, let's do 5 times 3, and then 15 plus 2, you'll get 17, the number you're dividing by. Now let's talk about powers. You know what powers are. A number times itself however many times. So powers, you can use it with the operator, and it looks like 2, you know how the multiplication operator looks like? It's a star, but powers is 2 stars. Now, so you can do 6 times 6 times 6 times 6 times 6, 216. Or you can do 6 to the power of 3, which also returns 216. Now, let's talk about assigning variables and how variables work. Variables can be assigned to by using one equal sign. Now remember, you always use one equal sign to assign a variable and one equal sign only. This is very important to remember, and you'll learn why later. Now let's assign a variable of var equals 6. Let's put var in there, gives you back 6. Now, what happens if we try to, say, tell the interpreter to print out a variable that we haven't defined yet? So let's have a variable var2. We haven't defined this variable yet anywhere else in the shell. It'll give me back a name error. Name var2 is not defined. Now if I set it to a number or something, then I put var2, it'll give me back 7. Now, if you have a mixed operation, like an operation using ints and integers and floating point numbers, so let's say 15 divided by 3.0, then it will convert it to a floating point number. Or if I do 21.0 divided by 7, floating point number. Now, let's talk about a special variable that can only be used in the shell. This variable is just an underscore. Now, this variable is set equivalent to the last thing that was printed in the shell. So if I type underscore, then I'll print 3.0. But if I print out 1 million, then and I type underscore, it'll print out 1 million. That is all for this tutorial. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion, please post it in the comments below, and I'll gladly help you or reply to you. Thank you for watching, and I'll upload another tutorial later this week.